For 30 years, health systems were promised that software would fix administrative work. It never did because software couldn't actually do the work. The platform runs inside more than 500 healthcare organizations, including HCA and Tenet, and completes over 85% of revenue cycle work without a human in the loop. My guest is Tanay Tandon, co-founder and CEO of Commure. Tanay started Athelas at 18 out of his Stanford dorm room, merged it with Commure in 2023, and has doubled ARR 3 years in a row. Tanay was amazing, and it was so good to have him on the pod. Tanay, it's amazing to have you on, so thank you for being here today. So it's interesting because Commure didn't start as Commure, it started with Athelas, and you were literally like 18 from your Stanford dorm room. That's pretty crazy because out of everything that you could have built, you started in healthcare, which is so interesting because I feel like you being at Stanford, everyone's probably building something, but you just chose like a random non-traditional path. What kind of got you into healthcare and at the first place? And what was the emotion and what people around you were saying at that time?
Yeah, it's a really good question because healthcare, I think now is very clear that it's a hot area for applied AI. It's a massive market. But at the time, it was almost a little taboo to be building in healthcare because there were so many companies that had failed. It was right around the time of the Theranos disaster. It was on the heels of a lot of different consumer healthcare businesses just not having good IPOs or not having good outcomes. The first wave of telehealth had kind of all not returned any investor capital. But it's still this like fascinating, massive problem because when you think about the scale of dollars that we spend and the sheer volume of time that's spent on healthcare and the labor that's spent on healthcare, it's too big to ignore. And so, for me, before that, I had in high school, I'd worked on a consumer app. I'd hacked on some other hardware ideas. And I think healthcare really just stuck as an area where you could build for a long time, you could compound for a long time. It was a massive market and there was a huge need. And at Stanford, I felt like I had this unique opportunity where the best medical researchers in the world at Stanford Med were in one place with the best AI researchers in the world at Stanford AI. And so my research in high school as well as in college, I worked at the Stanford AI lab as an intern. And my co-founder, Deepika, who's also one of my best friends, she worked at the Stanford Med Center in the multimodality imaging lab as a research intern. And so the company kind of started at the confluence of those two interests. And we've been building in the space ever since.
And not only did you just tackle healthcare at first with Athelas, you went with a heavily regulated area like FDA-cleared, like blood diagnostics and stuff. Mm-hmm. Why kind of go through massive, knowing that regulatory paths are going to be super damn difficult as you kind of build? Why go specifically there at first?
I would say that a little bit of it was we were just naive, and in hindsight, would we have started in the most regulated, we had hardware risk, we had regulatory risk, we had technical risk, we had clinical trial risk, and we had commercial risk. And there was just so many steps before you could make your first dollar. And so in hindsight, it was, we played the game on hard mode. And I think it was high altitude training. I think Deep and I and Drew are better founders now as a result of having played the game on hard mode for so long. But the honest answer is at the time, we just didn't know. We were convolutional neural nets are turning into a thing. There's a big need in the blood testing and blood diagnostics market. And we know how to build hardware. It's a unique kind of combination of our skill sets. There's a big problem here. Let's go bring the complete blood count to the home. And let's go take this very complex blood test that's manual, requires someone to click through on a microscope and turn it into something that a neural net can do in a patient's home. And it took 3 years, but we did it. And we got the device cleared, made it commercial. It still serves tens of thousands of patients to this day. But it was kind of our first applied AI product was the Athelas One.
At that age, building in this, I bet a lot of people didn't really take you seriously because you guys are that young. Who in your network or in general took you seriously at first, whether that be the first investment or first customer or intro, who actually took you to the next level?
It was a huge problem because it was kind of we had the benefit of being in the Valley where people appreciate and encourage young people to go build interesting things. And that's Stanford culture, that's Silicon Valley culture. That's a big reason that some of the best businesses in the world get built here. But number two, you're also up against, very tenured members of Stanford faculty who are skeptics about everything, and often rightly so. But it doesn't matter what you put in front of them; they're gonna poke holes at it. And I think that makes your own intellectual thinking more rigorous, which is net good, but it can also be disheartening. I remember meetings where we would go in and a professor would say, well, sure, you bring this blood test into a home, but like, what's the point? And I left the meeting being like, that's insane. Like, what do you mean? What's the point? Like, you can help, you can take a patient who is super chronically ill and save them like 100 trips to a lab. That's probably a net good thing. There's probably a way to make money there. And so I think there was a lot of on the job learning. We had to do a lot of reading. I think these folks in the industry respect you when you speak their lingo, when you speak their vocabulary. And so just getting smart fast was very important. I'd say the people that ultimately took big bets on us, you look at Kassar, who was at the time the COO of Y Combinator, and now he, founded and runs Applied Intuition, which is a $14-15 billion company. He was our Y Combinator partner, and he took a big bet that this could be a big company. And then Alfred Lin at Sequoia was, our first seed check, and I remember vividly him telling us, like, we don't know if this device is going to be the final thing, but you guys are a strong team, and we believe in applied AI in healthcare. Let's go take a swing at the problem. So, and then Hemant at General Catalyst, who I also met when I was 19, was a huge supporter of us and taking the swing in the world of hard tech and healthcare. And he was building Labongo at the time with Glenn, and the business became wildly successful. And we learned a lot from that. So those are some of the, you find the people who take bets on you and then stick with them for 10 years.
Absolutely. And not only that, but you didn't even start you started as a diagnostics, but now you're like one of the largest revenue cycle platforms. So that you made that massive switch. What made you kind of go into revenue cycle all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but like go into that space overall more on the admin side instead of just going consumer blood work?
It's a good question. So we built the Athelas-1, which is a blood diagnostic system. We got it cleared by the FDA. We launched it on the market. We scaled it to millions in annual revenue. And it was, by all means, I would say a fairly successful like Series A company. And we had the opportunity to potentially sell the business to another large diagnostics company and then call it a day and then maybe start the new business. But alternatively, I think what was so fascinating is we spent time in the clinics, as we spent time with the doctors, with the administrators, deploying our device. The learnings were just massive because we would see what are the rate limiting bottlenecks in their operation? Why are their businesses not as efficient as they could be? Why is healthcare so expensive? And the answer kept coming back to the admin. It kept coming back to the hours it would take to document a patient, the hours it would take to fight insurance for a denial or deliver an appeal. And I think over time we realized the true big market, you can build, these single diagnostics and they have big impact on patients and providers. But the big problem, the hard problem to solve is really the operating system. Is how does the billing work? How does the clinical documentation work? How does the back office function? How does it all connect? And until you solve that problem, you're only nibbling at the edges. That's like the whale of the problem that could actually make healthcare more efficient.
And it's very interesting because when did you take that swing into RCM when you were like 21? I'm assuming like when you were kind of post seed, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we were a couple years into it. Was, we dropped out, started the company as Athelas in 2017. And then it was probably like 3 or 4 years into, like in 2020, 2021 is when we started expanding the platform into telehealth, into our revenue cycle, into administrative tasks. And then I would say really it was in 2022 when it took full swing and started growing very quickly.
Yeah, and I would say it's arguably RCM is very unsexy as like a topic or like a place to be in, especially when you're talking to anybody that's not in healthcare. How did you, and especially at that time, like not that many people were really there. Now it's getting pretty hot. How did you kind of convince engineers and world-class team members to kind of join you guys in this like pretty much doubted at that time market?
It was 100% a challenge, particularly then. And I would say even now you have to really contextualize the problem. What it came down to was describing the scale. And describing just how, when the Carlson brothers with Stripe reinvented internet payments, the underlying back-end infrastructure of that problem was very dull and very boring. It was, interchange fees and banks and, how you connect with credit cards and the payment rails of the internet were complex much in the same way that the payment rails of healthcare are. But when, as an engineer, I think you're drawn towards those types of problems that are unnecessarily complex, unnecessarily broken, highly inefficient, and an opportunity to automate. And so when you describe the scale to talent, to investors, I think that's what gets people really excited. And As time has gone on, that's only become easier and easier, especially as language models have become so capable to really paint the picture of what the future of the world is going to look like.
And during that diagnostics era, I mean, since that began, kind of like teach you as Commure kind of got started shaping up and what it is today, like, is there any fundamentals that you kind of take from there to what you use now?
I think we learned so much in that era. We learned skills around hiring, skills around working with large health systems. We learned the problems, like the real pains within the health systems because we saw them. I would say some of the biggest learnings are also just on how to ship good product. The Athelas-One, it's a loved product. I mean, the customers and patients that use it, it is life-changing for them because it takes a venous blood draw and turns it into a finger prick that they can do in their home. And so for a small cohort of chronically ill patients who need high-frequency blood testing, it is like a complete change in their day-to-day experience. And I think that high of building something, the thrill of building something that changes someone's life so much is what is addicting to me personally and to I think our engineering team and all of our engineering leaders. So that to me was the biggest learning is if you can build a product that changes someone's life so much and makes them so much happier than they were before using it, that's like an energy source in and of itself that will keep you going for years and years.
Absolutely. And in 2023, obviously, Athelas kind of merged with Commure at that point, and then obviously, was it Athelas that was incubated by General Catalyst, or was it Commure that was incubated at that point?
So we shared GC as an investor, which was great because Commure was incubated within General Catalyst, and then Athelas was the Series V was led by General Catalyst, and so we had this interesting overlap and shared board member, but. I think most importantly, we saw that the two businesses were converging in that Commure was building these tools in the large health systems and enterprise, and we were building these tools and automations in the down market with the SMB and private practices. And there was just this very natural coming together of the two visions and platforms. And I think also this desire to deeply partner with Hemant in what he was building at General Catalyst was another big force in that.
And what leverage did you kind of come out of when those negotiations finished? Like in the end, you kind of came out as being like the CEO of Commure. How did that kind of, I guess, those negotiations take place and those decisions? How did it come up?
Well, the cool thing here is that it wasn't even really a negotiation per se, because we all wanted the same end goal, which was we wanted the product and engineering talent that we had at Athelas paired with the distribution and go-to-market relationships and large health system relationships on the Commure side. And so we started with the end effect, like we knew what we wanted to accomplish. And then there was, of course, decision-making in terms of how you structure the deal, in terms of how you go back and forth in terms of who's going to run what, how you capitalize the entity. But those things were fairly simple once we came at it with that shared end goal.
When you merge kind of like two companies, like I feel like merging a lot of companies with different cultures, with different code bases, a lot of different go-to-markets, a lot of deals pretty much die at that point. Like it's like hard to kind of get out of it. What pretty much broke first, and how did you fix that specifically?
It's a great question. I think the reality is when you do something of this scale, everything breaks at the same time. And there's you go into the merger with an understanding there's going to be chaos. It's going to be very chaotic. There's going to be differing opinions. There's going to be things that don't go perfectly, and you have to be fast and think on the job and make it work. So for me, the number one goal, the most important thing was the customers, which is how do we make sure that the customers know that they're actually going to get better products and accelerated innovation. And so the first 90 days of being on the job was literally visiting every single customer. Like we went and we flew on site with all the customers one at a time, built relationships with the CIOs, with the CEOs, and started to earn their trust. And then it was about iteratively shipping product. It was about essentially going to each one of those, the C-suite and showing them like, hey, this is the roadmap. This is how we think things are going to improve. We're not trying to upsell you on anything yet, but we do want to know that this is something that is useful and valuable for you as a business. So that I would say that after that, again, like starting with the end in mind, like we want to deliver an amazing customer experience. The internal operations were messy, but at least they were directed in that we knew what we were trying to do. There were changes we made in terms of leadership, in terms of talent, in terms of simplifying the org structure, flattening the org structure more, that I think all let us accelerate, and then really honing in the product lines and the 2 or 3 things that we super care about with the, with ambient documentation, the revenue cycle engine, and the back office automation suite. This was really the collective set of tools that we were directing the whole company towards.
Yeah. In 2023, we also had that GPT moment. Did that kind of affect the specific, as you mentioned, kind of hiring, the merger in general, like how did that specifically kind of take place in that
Yeah.
specific moment? Did any changes have to happen?
Yeah. I mean, the sequencing was we got the GPT preview end of 22, and then essentially heading into 23, it became a very like through 2023, it became super clear what was happening. And our goal was basically, and part of the reason for doing the merger was, it became clear that with great distribution, you could deliver some amazing product.
Right.
And like the capabilities of what software could do now had completely changed. So we kind of like became very aggressive about shipping product on ambient and revenue cycle automations, and took the bet that many of these things would, as the models continue to improve, the capabilities would continue to improve. And so the most important thing was the customer relationship and being embedded into their workflow. And that has served us quite well.
And when that happened, and when you were traveling to these different customer sites, did they kind of ask about how this could affect healthcare overall? Like, obviously now it's a little bit different. Everyone's getting adjusted with it. But like when that GPT moment happened, they probably didn't really know much about it because they were very focused on their own operations. But like, is that something that you had to educate on? This could potentially be a big difference as we kind of go and make more automations for Commure and things like that? Or was it just very simple? Let's build a trust and then just keep going.
What we found is the awareness about the first GPT moment was more of it like a toy. You basically had people using it to like write riddles and jokes, and that went viral. And so as a consumer tool, most meetings you were in, someone had used it or played around with it, especially as you ended towards the end of 2023. As a enterprise grade production tool, that was where there was a lot of, I would say, skepticism. And our job was to really package the tool in a way that showed enterprise grade durability to go win those big deals. We, in 2024, we won the two biggest ambient deals in the country, HCA and Tenet. And then on the back of that, we've just continued to expand and deepen those relationships. And I think our learning was, it's about workflow. And yes, the models themselves are compelling, but unless it's deeply integrated in workflow, can write back and pull from the EMR, can, essentially autonomously run these agentic tasks, a health system leader doesn't have the time of day to, sit around and play around with, with agents and tokens themselves. They really need a finalized, polished product. And so that's where I think that gap took some time, but once it was crossed, there was a lot of value that was created.
You brought up a couple of good points there, kind of looking into workflow. I think that's one of the most important things for startups these days, and for obviously still for you guys, kind of making sure you got your obviously onboarding your customers as easy as possible, kind of maybe potentially as fast as possible, and also kind of making sure that they're that they can use the tool as easy as possible. How did you guys kind of have to go through workflow challenges since the beginning of Athelas, and then you guys went through the merger and this? Like, how is the workflow now?
I think it's one of those things. The hardest thing about healthcare is you have so many different point solutions. The data is so disparate. It's sitting at 100 different places. And so in some ways, as important as the core product, which is the actual action that gets taken by the model, how ambient scribing works, the way the note is generated. As important as that is the data integration and IO methodology. How do you pull information out? How do you write it back? Where in the process does it sit? And so we've invested a lot of time. We have a team called Colossus that all they do is the read and write back of into the EMR, and nailing that part of the workflow. And I would say that continues to be one of the deepest differentiators. The companies that are growing very fast in the enterprise deeply understand how to embed these workflows into or how to embed these products into the workflow of the provider in the EMR versus trying to create a whole new kind of system. And I mean, we've seen like there's some degree of product growth in the standalone tools of the world. Like people use ChatGPT for quick questions. Open Evidence became kind of a novelty product for a lot of these clinicians. But the reality is, like, it all comes back down to the in workflow, in EMR, in revenue cycle, in ambient. That's where this intelligence is going to live.
And you guys are super horizontal. I mean, now we see a lot of companies actually going very point solution-y, where they're kind of targeting specific specialties and making like RCM tools or prior auth specifically for that specialty. And now you guys are kind of horizontal specifically for health systems, which is much more better. I remember kind of talking to a health system exec, and he mentioned where they kind of were working with like 13 vendors at one point
Yep.
in
Yep.
2023, and they lost trust in almost all of them because not that many showed ROI. And it's kind of crazy. Now they're like, trust is such a huge factor, as you kind of talked about. How did you guys kind of show that specifically to these health systems and show ROI as fast as possible so that they can kind of stick with the tool and actually see and reap the benefits even in the long term?
I think it comes down to building a deep relationship with the CFO's office and ensuring that every step of the way they're seeing ROI. We often won't charge until the customer is seeing ROI because we just
Oh,
we just know for a fact that until there's like real adoption, until there's real automation, charging them is a pointless exercise because if it doesn't work, then they're going to churn in a year. And replace you with something else, or try to do something internal. So for me, that's the most important thing. And again, I think it's sitting down with the C-suite and making sure that we have common goals, which is if we reduce documentation time by X, if we improve appeals and approvals by Y%, if we reduce the number of coding queries by this number, then we're all in alignment that this much ROI has been created. And once there's that like shared set of these are the numbers, this is what we're trying to do, then it's unquestionable. You can deploy a lot of capital, a lot of team members to go accomplish that goal. Whereas I think with standard SaaS, it's sort of great. Here's the tool. Here are the seats. Like run, and it can grow quick. Like don't get me wrong, standard SaaS is a beautiful model and it works. But there's something about like this like Palantir approach of go deep, add value, prove value, and then expand in like big chunky contracts because then your customer is such a loud advocate.
do you guys have FDEs on your team, or is that something you guys are looking to implement? Or
We do. We have a pretty large FDE team. We're continuing to build forward deployed engineering as a capability. Usually for us, it's less like building truly de novo products and more taking our current products, getting on the ground, sitting with the clinicians, and essentially like adapting it to their needs.
Yeah.
And we're for me, what really matters is making sure that FDE serves a very clear purpose, which is make sure the clinician sees ROI and that the product is adopted in their workflow. There's a lot of FDE teams out there that are doing pure dev shop things, and I think that's fine. You can build a business there. You're not going to build a massive business doing that, though.
Absolutely. I mean, and kind of going to your software point, you mentioned how I remember I saw somewhere in the past, you said software won't fix healthcare's administrative work. I mean, it tried, but it failed.
Yep.
And then because software couldn't do the work. But obviously now you guys work with so many health systems, and technically you guys kind of made it possible with what you guys are building to make it software actually work for these kind of clinics. Is it possible to what you guys are building here that 100% autonomy is actually the goal, or is there a potential where it's going to be maybe person driven? How does that look?
I think 100% autonomy is a good goal in certain areas of the business. So things that you really just don't want, a human to be spending their time on, which is like filling out a spreadsheet, pulling together information from 10 different systems, writing the actual appeal. Those are bad places for a human to spend time. I think humans are extraordinary at spending time on clinical care and having, physicians call bedside manner, which is making sure that the patient feels heard, that their care is personalized, that there's the emotional side of it as well. And our goal is to maximize every health system. Their maximal dollars should be spent on that because that's what's unique about their business. That's what allows them to differentiate. That's what allows them to become an important part of their community. Whereas the other stuff should be more, it's kind of like, I'm not very emotional about our cloud infrastructure and, AWS or GCP or Azure. It's like whatever works and gets the job done. That's what matters. Yeah. And revenue cycle should be like that too. You shouldn't have your best people spending cycles on something like revenue cycle.
Yeah. And you guys complete over 85% of the work, right? That I saw with no human pretty much in the loop. I mean, that's kind of crazy. What kind of changed technically to make that possible? Like, I'm assuming at one point it was probably a little bit difficult to show that. And now you guys are ramping up to kind of make literally no one and making sure claims get legible and verified fast.
I think the biggest change was model capability. So there's no question that as the foundation models have become more and more capable, these end-to-end agentic workflows have become feasible. Number two is a lot of the early point system-y or point solutioning companies in the space didn't have the full context. So let's say you're a scribe, a handheld scribe that someone uses. that isn't connected to the EMR or doesn't have access to RCM data, it's going to do a pretty good job of writing a note because, these models are quite capable. But here's what it's not going to know. It's not going to know that the context of the 10 previous appointments the patient had. It's not going to know the context of why was the patient denied for the claim the last 3 or 4 times that they came in. What is their open copay, and how do we help reconcile that and potentially cue that into the conversation as needed. So that type of systemic thinking doesn't exist in point solutions. And I think because our system is truly a platform and has access to the full data model, we've also been able to take on full autonomy, these sort of entirely agentic tasks where it has all the information it needs to go complete the task.
You mentioned that point solutions will be pretty much dead in 3 to 4 years. What kind of brought you to kind of say, look, point solutions are pretty much not really working out in healthcare, and that a lot of these healthcare AI startups that are making point solutions are not really going to be there as well? How did you kind of get to that kind of conclusion specifically?
I think it's one, if you're a student of history, you've seen this happen before. This has happened pretty much in every generation of the internet, where or the internet or of computing. An example that I always give is there's grammar correcting software called Grammatic, and there are many others like it. That when word processors first became a thing, these were very fast growing independent businesses. People would install their little grammar processing software, their little spell check software, and then they'd put it on top of their word processor, and it was like, wow, this is amazing. These products are growing so quickly. And then all of those companies died because the word processor integrated these very quickly into their core solution set because it made sense for the customer and for them to include it in the solution set. Healthcare is the same story. There's one data model that really matters. There is a series of tasks that are taken, the revenue cycle, documentation, whatever it might be, and you want them to be as connected as possible. You're going to use multiple software solutions, but you're not going to use one software solution for your clinical queries and one software solution for your ambient and one software solution for your appeals. But that layer is probably going to be more connected.
Where does AI not really work in your own stack right now, where it's like, dang, we tried this with AI, it didn't really work out?
It's a great question. What I would say is, I'll answer it in 2 parts. One, I think when you look at Mythos and Fable 5 and many of these next set of models, I mean, there's very little that they can't do. And so when they have the context and when they have the relevant prompting, they can usually get the task done. Where I would say the AI will often lag is sometimes it doesn't know what it doesn't know. Many of our large health systems have on-prem records of patient files and chart notes. And if the model is unaware of how to actually access that information, there's no amount of intelligence that's going to make up for a lack of context. So a big part of our job is that last mile, which is making sure the models are connected to all relevant pieces of context throughout the health system to actually optimize a claim, to actually optimize a piece of documentation. So again, I wouldn't call that quite a limitation in the model itself, because what's it going to do if it's not connected to some on-prem DB? But it is a limitation in how the models are deployed today, and that's something that we seek to continue to solve.
And not only that, you guys also have done a lot of M&A deals as well in ambient scribing, care navigation, and things, kind of pretty much taking it to this one-stop horizontal layer for you guys. I think it's interesting because you kind of did those for not to I guess you openly said that you do it mostly for distribution and getting out there. I feel like a lot of founders, correct me if I'm wrong, think about M&A for product or getting the talent of that specific team. How did you kind of think about this is the exact kind of places we want to go, care navigation, ambient scribing, and even though it could potentially be kind of crowded, and how did you walk away with being confident about those deals?
I think both the deals that we've done have been for distribution. I think there's also types of M&A that you can do for product in particular, and that's obviously something we will continue to look at. But for us, we felt like a lot of our product suite was superior to the rest of the market, or at least at parity with the best players in the market. And as a result, distribution accelerants were a big focus area for us. And with the Augmentics deal, we developed relationships with 40 health systems that they were in that we weren't in, and that was incredibly valuable. I would say with the Memorial deal, there were certain capabilities, I would say folks within health systems that were not, the traditional CFO or CIO, but actually focused more on care navigation, on patient engagement, who we believe are important relationships to have in the system for our voice agents platform. And so for us, I think the way we build conviction on a deal is we spend time with the customers. We get a sense of, are the customers happy with the product? Are the customers spending time with the product? Do they intend to stick with the product for some time so that we can expand with them? And that's how we build conviction on a deal. And then most importantly, does it line up with our long-term product roadmap? We believe that care navigation is critical to the voice agents platform. And having that expertise in deployment and having that expertise in relationships within health systems was critical to nailing those first couple deals. And now voice agents is going to be one of our fastest growing product lines. So for me, I think that's the goal. Often when you do the deal, you don't see it immediately, but then like 18 months later, it starts to all come together.
How is voice agents kind of becoming that most rapid kind of product for you guys? I mean, it feels like there's a lot of commodity out there in that specific sector. How are you guys? Is it because that you guys already established those connections, so it's like an extra feature layer for your prior customers, or like how is that? Why do you think that kind of became a very big fast product line for you guys?
I would say the reason it's growing so fast is, again, it comes out of context. A lot of the other voice agent companies out there today are selling a standalone product with okay-ish EMR integrations. Our advantage is that we have such deep, we're processing tens of billions of dollars of claims a year. We have such deep hooks to the payers. We have such deep hooks into the EMR. We have such deep hooks into the front office workflows, the back office workflows, the documentation workflows. And I think as a result, we can just launch a superior voice agent platform. All of our ambient scribing customers are looking to bundle from a cost-saving perspective. Why pay for two vendors when you can pay for one and get a great product that talks to each other? So to me, that's a good example of where the platform approach and the bundling approach will win out in the long term. And we've already built out the distribution force that touches all these practices, that touches all these health systems. And so then it's just a matter of continuing to grow those ACVs.
You've interestingly said that you plan on or talking about buying a bankrupt hospital. I thought that was really interesting. Why go that direction strategically? So,
Commure itself doesn't own a hospital, but GC, General Catalyst, obviously bought Summa Health, which it's a strong system in Ohio. Didn't have the best margin profile, and probably with all the changes in CMS payouts, was headed towards a more distressed financial state than one that most investors would have been comfortable with. I think General Catalyst's thesis was transforming one of these systems with AI is such a compelling first move, and now capable with these models that owning that system, there's a lot of value that can accrue there. And there's no other, what other venture capital firm owns a hospital? What other PE firm, owns a hospital and a bunch of tech companies? And so there's a real value creation thesis there, and we're lucky to be able to be a part of it.
Yeah, you recently raised $70 million at a $7 billion valuation, mostly, as you mentioned, for pricing purposes, which is interesting because clearly it looks like you guys are, I'm assuming, pretty profitable. What was the whole point of this raise?
It didn't really need the capital itself. The company was on a trajectory to be very cash flow positive with just the deals deployed this year. But the goal in some ways was, one, set a new mark, set a new price, but also accelerate certain R&D efforts in some of our more frontier areas. Like voice agents was actually one of the areas that we wanted to build up pretty aggressively and invest in more aggressively. And so the other thing is that I think we've used credit, and not like traditional debt, but we've used CBF, which is customer cohort financing from General Catalyst, quite aggressively. Yeah. And that's, we have a multi-$100 million, tranche of funding there that allows us to grow our go-to-market spend much faster than our peers. And I think that's been a very valuable tool as well.
Yeah. You've referenced the Rockefeller funding playbook. Could you mind kind of talking about what that is and how that's different from dilutive VC stuff?
Yeah, I think, Rockefeller was like the king of credit. And so when he, and he was the king of using every asset at his disposal in order to raise that credit and in order to accelerate his growth and reinvest in the business. And so for them, their refineries were assets and on balance sheet. They would use credit aggressively in order to expand their refinery empire and then reinvest the cash flows year over year. For me, I think the most compelling one, Rockefeller was also an amazing acquirer of businesses. He grew his distribution through acquisition, and there was really impressive, I would say, horizontal and vertical integration across their stack. And so Standard Oil is a business that we really look up to because it's one of the great American businesses. It was one of the largest businesses of all time. And it was run with very little outside dilutive capital raised. We've obviously raised dilutive capital and we're venture backed. But I think much of the the forward-looking capital that we raise will be non-dilutive or will be raised in very non-dilutive ways. And our goal is to use things like our recurring customer cohorts as a financing source to expand the go-to-market teams, to expand our investments in R&D much, much faster. And the final thing I'll say about Rockefeller and Standard Oil, I think, is they were very good acquirers of businesses in that they could quickly assess the value that a business would have in their engine, and they had a formula for doing it. And once they set this formula and once it was in place, it was kind of like a binary go no go decision. There wasn't a lot of debate. If a set of refineries or a set of manufacturing lines or railroads would be value accretive, they would do the deal. And I think there's a lot of Silicon Valley companies that pontificate and philosophize on acquisitions and M&A more than actually just doing good work. And so for us, it's about the math, it's about the business sense, and it's about continuing to build great products.
When will Commure kind of go IPO? I know you mentioned maybe a couple years. And what do you guys have to pull internally and maybe externally? You have to prove something to pull that trigger.
Yeah, I think we're trending, in probably like a year or two, the business's scale and its growth would be that of a top decile public company, and so we're excited about that. Now, at the same time, you want to time these things to the market and to the needs of the business. If there's no imminent need for a lot of outside capital, there's enough funding sources for us in the private markets that there could be benefits to staying private for a while and then create secondary liquidity for a lot of the employees. I think for us, the goal is build a great business. And if you build a great business that's repeatable, that's at scale, that you can put go-to-market dollars into, and it turns into a lot of predictable recurring revenue, that's what public markets love. And that also just happens to be the hallmarks of a very strong business. So in that sense, the goals are somewhat detached from when we go public, but they're also, it creates the same outcome.
What's making you maybe not stay private much more longer than maybe like 5, 6? I mean, like, pull the Stripe playbook at this point and then just stay private and then go whenever maybe you need to at absolute necessary versus just going IPO in maybe 3 years?
It's a total fair question. It's also one that we debate a good amount. I think I'm a big believer in the public markets. I think the best American businesses are public and are businesses that the public can also invest in and be a part of their story. And I think we're in some ways like an N of one business. The scale of the platform, the breadth of tasks that we take on, and really the scale of labor transformation that we're trying to do. There's not a company like it in the private markets or the public markets. And so those are the types of businesses that I think do well for years and years on end and attract long-term holders. And hopefully, we get to be a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare hasn't had that many public IPOs. I mean, the last one probably was like Hinge Health, and then maybe one or two after that. You would probably be one of the first in the RCM space, I would assume, in that kind of category, which I bet like maybe 3-4 years ago didn't really feel like a big category that could go to the public markets in general. But I mean, obviously you landed these large customers like HCA and Tenet, which kind of brings me to my next point, which is like, how did you build such a big trust with these large organizations like HCA, and Tenet? Did you have to find the champions? Did you have to find people outside of your network? What was that process like?
I would say Hemant and General Catalyst just developed such deep relationships with many of those CEOs, and we were able to lean on those quite aggressively, and then obviously develop our own relationships over time as well with the CEOs of those companies. And what I would say across our customer base is vendors and partners that actually deliver results are quite rare, which is surprising to me. And so when you become one of the vendors or partners that is on the ground, delivering results again and again, it attracts the attention of the C-suite. And I think it was just earning respect, starting with a small contract, earning respect, expanding little by little every year. And so for me, it's my recommendation is always start small, knock it out of the park, and then expand over time, as opposed to biting off way more than you can chew. And if you do that, then I think the end net result is you build a lot of trust with the CEO and you earn the right to do more business with them in the future.
I think one potential, and I'm assuming this was such a big question when you were looking for investment ever since, was kind of Epic being such a big behemoth in this space. You've kind of partnered with them in a way that's like, we're not trying to go against you. When should a healthcare startup partner with like a huge incumbent versus try to kill them? And what was your strategy there?
I think, we have a great partnership with Epic where we serve ambient to a lot of their customers. We serve patient engagement modules, many other tools across their customer base. And so, look, the reality is, will there be overlap in the long term with what the EMRs do? Of course. I mean, revenue cycle is an important market for them too, and it's
Yeah.
a way many of them expand their ACVs. But I think they also recognize that they're not going to be able to do everything for everyone. And healthcare is such a big market that, if you just serve a subset of customers, like you just serve ASCs, you can build a big business. If you just serve, the PT market, you can build a big business.
Yeah.
And so our belief has been, we partner pretty closely with the EMRs, and between Athena, ECW, Epic, Cerner, we have deep relationships with all of them. But at the end of the day, they want to do what's best for the customer. We want to do what's best for the customer. They're going to have their native solutions. Sometimes the customer picks the native solution. Sometimes the customer picks ours. And particularly if they're specialties or verticals where we're better than anyone else in the world at, the customer's going to pick us. And the EMR is actually going to be happy about it because it builds more lock-in with their EMR too.
Kind of talking about lock-in, wouldn't it, I mean, make a little sense if like these large health system is working with Epic already, might as well just use Epic's, RCM tools, their scribing tools and all of that versus Commure? Like how do you guys kind of tell these health systems, look, yes, there's Epic and they're building this amazing stuff, but we're here that can also integrate and partner with Epic in that kind of way?
I think it comes down to the capabilities and the details. So, like
Yeah.
the Epic Scribe is, I think, a solid product for many subspecialties, particularly in primary care, particularly in I would say in outpatient settings. Have they nailed like complex ED workflows or acute workflows, or connecting this to the back office? Not yet. And so that's really where a lot of our partners see that we come out far ahead. And so I think the CIOs have very clear capability matrices of what Epic does and what's on their roadmap versus what they need today and what they want to partner with someone on. And so for me, it's all about like being very transparent about, this is the capability roadmap. This is what we do. This is what, Epic does today. Here's where we think we can add value, and then run from there. And I think the best for-profit CEOs in particular, and I would just say like the best CEOs in general of hospitals, recognize that it's probably a bad move to have your entire product strategy on one partner. And because of that, we've been able to innovate in net new areas with a lot of them.
I wanted to kind of talk about token costs, because one thing I strongly believe in that what you said was that, that token costs are eating up traditional SaaS margins. And I mean, it's
Sure.
such a true thing in that kind of case. You're pretty much building in that space with LM native EMRs. And I guess one thing that Commure is kind of claiming is that like you guys are improving these razor thin margins, right?
Mhm.
That hospitals have to around 20-30% in the long term. Can you kind of put like, how would that look maybe in like 6-7 years from now on the hospital software stack and their P&L? Like how would that change all of that?
I think it's very interesting because tokens are expensive when you compare them to regular software. Tokens are very cheap when you compare them to the cost of labor. And so it's all about the intelligent use of tokens. If you are using, here's a good example, running a deep research query on Gemini or ChatGPT or Anthropic for a investment grade report on a company, or, maybe healthcare specific, like a disease or a condition, might cost like a couple bucks in token costs, or maybe, 10, 20 bucks, whatever the number is. But compare that to the hundreds of dollars an hour you'd be paying for a top analyst to synthesize that information, put it together, and come to the same conclusions. Is way better. And so similarly, the calculus is going to be, if I can take labor costs that are expensive in-house, usually onshore, and turn them into token costs, good CEOs will always take that bet. Now, you have to have controls. The reality is, like, if you just let people use all the tokens they want, things are going to become way too expensive. And so you're going to have good controls in place, both at the health system level and as a software product builder at our level, just to make sure that the end customer is, one, just to make sure that we are actually deploying those tokens in places that create value for the end customer, and aren't just kind of like empty vapor token use.
What are you telling your engineers when it comes to token use? Is it just going max blast on them, or like use it when it's needed? Like what is your mentality there?
We have enterprise level controls in place in terms of who gets to use what. The reality is, like, most tasks aren't going to need like a Fable 5 level model or Mythos level model to get done. And so we tranche and triage it. The best engineers in the company who, we've assessed based on code quality, based off of feature, their ability to build features, et cetera, are probably like, you should use 80% of our token budget, because I want the highest IQ people in the business to be using as many tokens as possible, because it really extends them. What I'll say is that there's a propensity for everyone to try to token max, and we avoid that. We set clear limits, and we make sure that people are not using them for dumb tasks, like just like, managing their calendars, or like agents that are like, running around and pulling news for them. Like, that's not useful for the business. But the things that are useful for the business, we heavily encourage.
Right, absolutely. With obviously Fable 5 and, with Fable and Opus 4a and all of these amazing models coming out, what have you learned about them that actually works and what actually doesn't work, versus like what so many people online are pretty much saying stuff like, it doesn't work in healthcare because of XYZ, or it does work in healthcare because of this XYZ. Like and you're obviously in the front lines. What have you seen and work and not work?
Our learning has been that a lot of the people on LinkedIn that are talking about, like these models aren't good enough for healthcare, we just don't know what they're talking about. Like when it comes to the quality of ambient documentation, when it comes to the quality of revenue cycle tasks, you put one of these top frontier models against your best biller, your best, documenter. It's usually beating them at most of these tasks, just because of the depth of knowledge that it has access to. I think when you look at what you can't do is, give a very vague, unscoped task to one of these models to go build, build some end-to-end feature without really giving a lot of thought into what the feature should look like, what should the end state look like. And I think most of the IQ points in engineering tasks are actually very clearly describing the end state, knowing what the end state should look like, what are the edge cases and test cases you want to handle for, and then just like nailing them. And so our learning has been that people that can do that can very clearly write, like good writers and I would say rigorous thinkers, are doing super well right now with these models. And so what the model can't do is like guess what you want. Like you need to be very specific, and that's where it's been mostly successful on it.
Two more questions before quick rapid fire here. Do you kind of buy the whole scaling laws thesis where, the capabilities keeps climbing with compute and data, or do you think we're nearing a plateau? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think until proven otherwise, the scaling law thesis holds. So we're as everything that we can see right now is that data is the rate limiting bottleneck, and if you can truly like give these models enough examples and give them enough compute, they will continue to learn and get better. And then I think it seems like we're close to unlocking, these more of these like RL like loops where the models can teach each other things and debate concepts and, try to prove concepts. That's going to get very interesting then.
Does that change any of the bets that you're making with Commure, or does that keep everything that you've kind of had hypothesized, cleanly? Like, what does that look like as well?
The way that I think about it is we've kind of designed and set up our business in a way such that as token as intelligence, per token or intelligence of these models continues to go up, we, our customers benefit, and so just ride that wave. And for me, that is just going to continue to be the North Star, which is build products that can take advantage of the underlying intelligence of the models to do more and more for the end customer, as opposed to somehow be counterpositioned against that trend.
Are you guys loyal to one lab, or do you guys kind of treat all of these OpenAI and Anthropics as interchangeable commodities for you guys?
I wouldn't say they're commodity specific. We work with all three. So, we work with OpenAI, we work with Anthropic, we work with Gemini. Those are sort of our three big model providers. And then on transcription and speech to text, we partner with Assembly and a couple others. We have some homegrown models of our own. So ultimately, I think we want to deliver the best possible customer experience. So we'll use the model that serves that purpose, but we also partner with them by, doing data shares and training models. And I think it takes an ecosystem to really make these models very, very good.
Yes. And kind of a quick question here. Do you think that the data sharing might be potentially a kind of bad thing with these large models, like specifically, and just grow your own models? I know that's kind of going around like crazy. Just build your own models and instead of just trusting these large frontier labs. Like, have you ever put thought? And I know you mentioned you guys are building a couple of your own custom models. What is your thinking there?
I think in general, I think you have to partner with the labs. There's no question that there's just the amount of intelligence and compute that they've aggregated. Like you have to partner with them. With that being said, I think there are going to be certain tasks where it makes more sense to train your own models. I personally prefer that we're focused on the unique needs of our customers rather than spending a lot of time building up inference and training pipelines. But at the same, that might change. I mean, things are changing so quick in the industry right now. There's a version of the world where it's more economical and interesting for us to go train our own models because we literally multiple percentage points of U.S. healthcare now go through our system, and so we have very unique access to that data.
True. And I'm assuming data privacy is one of the biggest questions you get through for these guys, obviously, for obvious
Yep,
reasons. What do you tell
100%.
them? Yeah, what do you kind of tell them specifically about working with these frontier labs and things when it comes to data sharing for patients? I'm assuming it's just none of this data it's very anonymized, very private based, but like, is there anything specific that you kind of mention and tell them?
There's a lot of certifications, between the various ISO certifications, the SOC certifications. But most importantly, at the end of the day, it comes down to showing them that one, like our data retention policies follow exactly what we discussed. So, in a lot of the large enterprises, we're retaining for 30 days, 45 days. And then after that, it's up to them in terms of how they want to approach it. For other customers, they actually prefer that the data be stored and be used to improve their customer experience. And in that case, we adhere to that, and that's useful for everyone. But the table stakes for, I think, any healthcare software platform, I mean, this has been solved now with the EMRs for decades and decades, is you have to ensure that there's good data privacy in place, that you're auditing your systems, that the risk of leak is very low, and the risk for any sort of breach is also very low. So that's both a personnel thing and also a system design thing.
Absolutely. Tanay, quick rapid fire here. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
So what is one habit that had the biggest impact to where you are now?
I would say I try to read every day. So whether that's, I love reading history, and I think a lot of the answers about the future are in the past, in the sense that you can read about Napoleon, you can read about Alexander the Great, you can read about businesses that were created in the 1900s, and many of those trends are re-showing up now.
Yeah, who's your favorite, like, I guess in history, in the back, like, great figures? Obviously, like Alexander the Great. You talk about Rockefeller, but like going to Alexander the Great times, like who do you like kind of look up to, like, there?
I mean, I think in terms of like war tacticians, like
Yeah,
Alexander the Great, Napoleon are like the greatest. There's like and then, I mean, I think if you read about like more recent businesses, like even in the 1900s, like General Electric, I think, was a very well run business. There's like a lot to learn about how they consolidated, how they acquired, how they integrated businesses, and we've GE and Rockefeller. I think there's a lot of shared DNA.
crazy. Yeah, absolutely. What is something that you believe that a lot of startups about? What is something that you most believe about startups that most people would disagree about?
Yeah, I think you'll see these like common startup tropes on Twitter and stuff. People will say like, "Oh, if it's going to work, it works really fast," or if it's you often see people also like starting a company, and then like if it doesn't catch fire in 18 months, they leave the company. And I just think that's like a guaranteed way to fail. Like, good things take time, and I think our belief is that we're like generally like intelligent people, but more importantly, we'll just stick with problems longer than our competitors, and that's why we'll win in the long term.
Yeah, what is one prediction for healthcare over the next like 5-10 years?
I think there will be continued consumerization of healthcare, which I think is good. So you'll have like power that shifts from insurance companies, where like so much of the profits are locked up today, to consumers and providers directly, which is going to be good. And I think you'll see more provider supply get created by AI. Like as many of the basic tasks get turned into things that people just ask language models and self-treat at home, even you'll have more provider capacity that gets created for higher acuity problems, which I think is a very good thing.
That's so true. Like, what is like two more questions here? What is the trend everyone is kind of excited about that you're kind of betting against?
I think one of the trends right now is there's going to be all these like little cool purpose-built models, and every company, for in fundraising decks, you see it all the time. It's like, look, we have the best model for this. I think the trend that we're like, the reality is the large foundation models are just going to be so much better at these general purpose tasks and all software is going to have to require some amount of intelligence about general purpose tasks, that maybe you get some COGS improvement from training your own models, but it's way better to like scale with the hyperscalers. My analogy for this is, there was a time, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, where Dropbox was very proud of the fact that they had completely decoupled from AWS, and they saved $100 million a year doing this. It was a big engineering effort. They, instead of using the cloud, they now had their own, their own cloud. They built their own data centers, et cetera. This ended up being like a pretty dumb investment, I think, in hindsight, because those engineering resources could have been directed towards building more product, could have been directed towards investing in true R&D instead of just rebuilding the commodity stack that everyone had access to. That's kind of what's happening right now. Everyone's training these like purpose-built models that kind of do the same thing, and maybe like is a little cheaper, 20-30% cheaper. But most of those, yeah, it's not like way better. And then those dollars instead you're just giving to base 10 or someone else. Like someone else is just getting those dollars at the end of the day.
Right. Final question here, Tanay. What is the best advice you were given that you did not listen to?
There were a lot of people early on that told us that building a hardware medical device was a bad use of our time. And in some ways it was good advice. They like when you just look at it pragmatically, maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe like we should have started as a software business. But I think for our journey and for how we built the business, it was so valuable to do that very, very hard thing up front because it convinced us we could do anything. And when we enter a software problem now, it feels like playing on easy mode relative to the trials and tribulations of building a regulated hardware device. So it was good advice. Medical devices are hard, but I think it served us well in many ways.
Yeah, but dude, it's amazing to have you on the show, and I enjoyed this so much. It was a pure joy. Thank you again. I truly appreciated it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.